Hello, my name is Tvrdik. I'm a member of the Bolton, Massachusetts Lions Club, which is a part of the larger worldwide Lions International organization. We created a very special fundraising program, which I coined the Legends of Music Concert Series. The idea is very simple. We invite a musical legend into a small venue for an evening of intimate conversation and music with the audience, as well as audience participation. The intent also is to fund a number of very worthwhile causes, including pediatric cancer medical research, and patient care, diabetes and eyesight medical research, funding for rehabilitation programs for disabled American vets, and a number of outreach programs as well. I am delighted to be talking with John Sebastian, a legendary singer-songwriter, a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, as well as the founder of the world-renowned band of the 1960s, the Lovin Spoonful. I had the pleasure of meeting John 1 or 2 years ago, and I asked him to be willing to help us by performing a concert for the Bolton Lions for the causes that we support. John very quickly, without even thinking, just gave me his telephone number and also the number and name of his business manager. I called Dave, and within a very short period of time, we struck the deal. So, with that, good morning, John. Thank you so much for having us here.
You bet.
And thank you for taking the time to let us interview you as a prelude to the concert coming up on Saturday evening, November 10th, 2018, at the Hudson Portuguese Club in Hudson, Massachusetts. We are working very hard to fill that club to capacity for you, and I think we can do that.
Marvelous.
Again, for those folks that are viewing here, to get further information, to obtain further information on the concert and to obtain tickets, please check us out at boltonlions.org. So, John, you've had a very interesting musical career. I mean, very interesting. And it started way back in the early 60s, maybe late 50s, with the Even Dozen Jug Band and also the Mugwumps. Can you tell me something, can you tell us something about those bands and how they got started and what it was like to work with people like Pete Seeger? And how did John Sebastian get involved in those bands?
Well, let's try one at a time, because
Sure.
they in retrospect seem like they're sort of paired, but they were very separate entities. The Jug Band was an effort by some young folks to emulate the music of the 20s and 30s that had basically come down as a blues form, an African-American form that was a little wider in scope than a lot of styles, because these were guys who played for, you know, tobacco workers during their break, or you know, street corner, people accumulated on a street corner. So it had to be a type of music that, you know, the Irish guy would get it when he played the jig, and you know, the blues guy would get it when he did the moan, and you know, all of that kind of thing. So we were sort of junior Jim Kweskin Jug Band guys. You know, we were a few years younger with a few lesser skills, and so we idolized Jim Kweskin and his guys. And it was a fairly short-lived, but it was a wonderful thing that happened, because Elektra Records was interested in having a jug band. They were theorizing that this would be a craze and that we should get in on this. And so we suddenly had carte blanche, or that 60s version of that, in the studio, and a great producer. So we got ourselves an album, and it eventually just everybody in that band was good in one way or another.
Yeah.
David Grisman, of course, he's going to, get off on his career. Maria D'Amato, who was later Maria Muldaur,
Right.
of course, is right there, and it went that way with just about everybody in the band. So it kind of just expanded out into other musics. And as far as the Mugwumps go, that is very separate because that all happened in Washington, D.C. I got employed by a folk singer by the name of Valentine Pringle. It's probably my first real job where a guy was paying me to go out of town. So we went to Washington, D.C. to a club that turned out to be absolutely central to what was to come, because the guy that owned the club was Bob Cavallo, who would eventually become my manager. The road manager at that time was working Cavallo's club. And it was an upscale kind of a place, very different than the little gaslight cafes and things. This is a place where people in the foreign service and kind of very often, non-American diplomats and so on would bring their kids, and eventually there became an afternoon show as a result of that, because it was a bar in the evening, and they realized that there was this enormous market as the Mugwumps started to present this very palatable, even to mom and pop, kind of what was sort of the dawn of folk rock. And they, and eventually we, were playing Timmy Hardin tunes and Fred Neil tunes. They did a few of my earliest efforts, and it was a lot of fun until they went to New York and tried to play the Peppermint Lounge.
Oh, yes.
Now that's where you learn about the division between this little commercial folk rock thing and down and dirty, So the band disbanded shortly thereafter, I think realizing that, there were other things to do. Obviously, everybody thought, well, Cass is gonna, not gonna have any trouble, and I remember we sort of didn't know, what's Denny gonna do? But everybody found a way to continue in the music field and avoid honest work.
Well, Denny and Cass became two of the members of Mamas and Papas.
That's right.
Then you and Zolly
became part of the Spoonful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the band, the Mugwumps, served a purpose, even if they didn't quite have it yet.
Yeah, great story. Yeah. When you were growing up, your dad was a classical harmonica player.
Yes.
And your mom wrote radio script.
Yeah.
And you had such incredible, talented people coming through your home on a regular basis. Burl Ives, Woody Guthrie.
Yeah, Woody, I have to, my disclaimer is that Burl talked Dad into having Woody Guthrie come and stay for a week or two. And it took years to see biographies of Woody to realize, oh, right, that might have been a time when he was sort of on the outs with the family.
Probably.
And and Burl was more of a frequent visitor and loved to eat my father's food. My dad was a great cook, so there was a definite, it was humming there.
So with all that going on, and these people coming in and out of your life on a regular basis, and music everywhere, and intellectuality everywhere, did any other career beside music enter your mind, or your dad's mind, or your mom's mind, or was it always destined that John was going to be a musician?
Boy, nobody ever pressured me in that direction. My father knew the difficulties, and as he later, when I was a much older guy, he said, I used to watch my old college classmates and I'd visit them in their new, older lives, and they're trying to pressure the kid to go into law.
Exactly.
And you could already see that it might not, this kid might not be that guy, you know? So he was always very anxious even not to create a false, you know, excitement or nervousness about what I should do about, and of course that's the most seductive thing in the world. Now you feel an open channel and you go. But of course it wasn't ever going to be anything like what Dad did, because that really is a much more demanding form. I can't achieve that in my lifetime.
But you did have the musical basics.
I saw how I could watch how a guy breathed and so on.
Right, exactly. So it was almost fate that John Sebastian was going to do great things in music.
Yeah.
There was really no doubt about that, and that was obvious to my friends, my brother, myself, our girlfriends, that the Lovin Spoonful was just on target, and those songs were written by John Sebastian. Yeah, amazing, just amazing. Can you tell us more about the Lovin Spoonful? There was something on your website that mentioned the fact that this really wasn't a revolution that you were creating in music, it was a counter-revolution. I mean, you mentioned that the Beatles were bringing this music over and you wanted to see more American music.
The idea, I mean, it wasn't nationalistic, it was just the logic of, well, I remember the first time we watched the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, me and Zolly were going, he's listening to Chet Atkins, you know, George, my God, where did he come up with this stuff? Carl Perkins, I hear it, you know? And so there was a kind of a feeling of, well, we could do this and skip the middleman, because it's just American music being transported and then re-imported. Correct. So
that is correct.
So that was our idea.
In your vast career, did you ever meet any of the Beatles?
Oh yeah. We
What was that
eventually
like?
got
That had
to know
be
each
amazing.
other. Well, it was very brief, and unfortunately, the big Klieg lights were already on those poor guys, and so natural exchange was very hard. But I had an evening or two. You know, George Harrison pulled me out of a kind of a hotel meet and greet and said, "Would you like to get out of here?" And I said, "Yeah." And we went over to Brian Jones's house and smoked hash and played sitars all night. And that was lovely. And George was always such a gracious guy for me. And in fact, I enjoyed, you know, John's sarcasm and Paul's. He's the guy, you know, he takes it on the chin, because he really stands up and says, "Here I am." You know, there's no.
Yeah.
So the wonderful cats. Years later, you know, Ringo, I didn't meet until a big birthday party in England at a castle with Donovan and other pals. And, I mean, staircases with the guy in, you know, the armory.
Oh yes,
all
the
the way up.
knight in armor and that sort of thing, you know.
And my youngest son Charlie is pretty amazed, and I think he was still recovering from having David from the Pink Floyd shake his hand, and
wow.
He knows who that is, right? But then a few minutes later, he's introduced to somebody as, "Yes, and this is Richie." "Oh, how do you do, Richie?" And I can see his face changing as he's shaking Ringo's hand, going, "Oh my God." So
that's great.
those were my, you know, it was limited exposure, but it was nice.
Yeah, something you wouldn't trade for anything, I'm sure. Yeah. There were some interesting things said on your website regarding your music. And as we had discussed previously, I'm going to just read this to you. and just ask for your comment, because I think your comments outside were very interesting. I'd like you to give those to the audience. Your website says, and I'm quoting, they take an older music or older material from blues, country, folk, and jug band sources, what we now term roots music, and made it sound modern. Again, this is right from your website. Then in a series of original songs composed and sung by John Sebastian, they did the reverse, creating thoroughly modern music that sounded like it contained the entire history of American music, which it did.
Well, this isn't anything magical. This is just a kind of a continuum of learning how to play music. And in the case of the Spoonful, we played for several months before I had written more than about, I think I might have written 1 or 2 very derivative tunes, Good Time Music, which was essentially high-heeled sneakers, you know, a couple of other things that were heavily derivative and so on. And but we had all this jug band music that could stand in for an entire set, and we were eventually playing 8 sets a day in Greenwich Village. So we were really being, they were kind of drawing unrehearsed songs out of us just so that we could keep playing, and that this is one of the ways that we got good. And it was just part of the continuum that now, having a little bit of source material, and I know a feel I want to imitate, because I don't know, in these simple types of folk music and that we were playing and that I'm still playing, it is very easy to absorb something that you could give back in a slightly different form, or with modern perspective, or any of those kind of things.
That absolutely makes sense. Absolutely, thank you. That's an excellent response. John, the last few questions. First of all, Wikipedia entry says that you were quoted, among other things, for your impromptu appearance at Woodstock in 1969. What did that mean, impromptu? How did that whole thing roll out? And just a brief answer was fine, because I know you want to address a lot of this during the concert.
Here we go. So, no, it is actually not much of a subject. My concertizing. But the way it happened was this. I was trying to get to Woodstock as an audience, you know, not a performer. Paul Rothschild, a famous producer, had said, John, you should probably try to get to this show. It may be miraculous. Everybody that's sort of participating is saying, how could this happen, you know? So
here John Sebastian arriving at Woodstock.
All right, so here's but that was the whole thing, was how are you going to arrive? Mm-hmm. All right, see, I actually went to the Albany airport speculatively to see if I could get on a smaller airplane that would get me closer, because I knew it was not easy. But that's all I knew. Communication, remember, is radio in the airport. You know, that's what it is. So I'm standing in front of a big picture window that looks out over the tarmac, and I notice a guy loading a helicopter. And as I look a little closer, I realize that's Walter Gundy. That's the second road manager that the Lovin Spoonful ever had. Back in the day when nobody knew what road managers really did. It was a thing that had to develop. But anyway, we were close. And remember, there's no impediment going down onto the tarmac. And so eventually Walter turns around and realizes I'm at the window and gestures, come on down the stairs. I go around to open the door, go down the stairs onto the tarmac, and he's loading what turns out to be the incredible string band's equipment onto the helicopter. And he says, you're trying to get to Woodstock. I said, yeah. He goes, get in this helicopter. This is your only shot. He says, the roads are completely clogged up. Every public service is frozen. And so indeed, I entered Woodstock with that famous shot that you see in the movie.
Yes.
That's pretty much my experience. Miles where you couldn't see any grass or lawn or anything. It's all tents and Volkswagen buses and picnic tables and like
people everywhere.
And people everywhere. Yeah. So that was my entrance, and the reason that it was impromptu was that in those days access to backstage really didn't exist. You know, it felt like the music business consisted of about 50 people. We knew everybody, and so you'd go, who's that guy? Should he be back here? That would be the only kind of security element to it, would be like that. So I was freely going back and forth, saying hi to my pals and everything, and first night goes by, second day, middle of the day, starts to rain. And I'm standing on stage with Michael Lang and both promoters, and Michael says, "Boy, oh boy, you know, we gotta sweep the stage. We gotta get this water off the stage because we can't put any amps on this stage." So there's people already sweeping, and he says, "Boy, you know what we need is a guy who could hold them with an acoustic guitar, just like for about 40 minutes while we got this done." And I'm looking out at the crowd, and I'm going, "Yep, that's what we need." And I'm running like, "Here's Timmy Hardin's here, so and so. Wait, there's a lot of people who could do this." And then I turned to Michael and I realized he's looking at me and the other promoter is looking at me. And I say, "I didn't even bring a guitar." And Michael goes, "Well, you have a few minutes to get one."
Oh, wow.
So I run backstage. Timmy Hardin is back there, who I have a history of playing with back in the village. And he's only too happy to lend me his Harmony Sovereign. And I went on.
Amazing. And that is history. I mean, it was just a phenomenal performance.
Turned out to be.
Absolutely amazing. So now the whole industry has changed a little bit, and you're maybe doing some other things like creating songs for Broadway, maybe some stuff for TV.
Yeah.
And the big thing happened to be, at least, you know, from my generation, was Welcome Back, Kotter.
Yeah.
Now you may want to comment on that today, because having seen your shows before, I know you also talk about it during the show.
Yes.
So,
yes. I'll do the full blow by blow for your audience on that evening, but essentially it was so straightforward. My manager knew a producer. The producer calls my manager and goes, "I'm looking for a kind of a John Sebastian type guy," and my manager says, "Well, I happen to be managing John Sebastian now." I go in, and the thing was already a thing in 24 hours.
wow, so you wrote that song in 24 hours?
That's very often that kind of work. You know, in the industry, it's very easy to make light of the folks that do this kind of incidental music and in background to non-specific television shows. And I had occasion to where I had to provide some of that type of music. I'd go take after take, and I'd go, "No, it's taking too much attention away from the speaker. I gotta play something more kind of like a gouache or something."
Yeah.
Anyway, I was eventually replaced by the original guy that had done the music because he knew how to do that.
Sure. The Lovin Spoonful was such an incredible band to see in person that folks want to know, would there ever be a Spoonful reunion, even with you and Steve and Joe? I mean, just the three of you. Would that ever happen?
Well, Stephen and I get together fairly routinely, not always to do shows, but there were some situations. He lives in Florida. I did some shows in Florida and said, come on over. And we play, it's like falling off a log.
I'm
it's
sure.
so instinctive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not 2 weeks ago, the Night Owl Cafe, where we had our original sort of long stay, was run by a man named Joe Mara, who was having his 85th birthday at the Bitter End Cafe. And I called up Steve and I said, hey, you want to do it? He said, yeah. I said, what's Joe doing? He said, he's unpacking the whole apartment. He can't do anything. He's, you know.
Yeah.
So that became another opportunity for the duo, the Half a Spoonful, which I really enjoy playing that way.
Of course.
Stephen has such a great quality as a bass player, and as I say, we are pretty much on automatic.
Right.
It's a rhythm section thing, and so to that extent, yes. But you know, the Lovin Spoonful was Zolly, it was me, it was the four guys, it was the intersection of the two finger picking, you know, folky stylists that had been submerged in rock and roll, because that's what you did when you were 14. That's how you learned, was playing Buddy Holly tunes. And so we had the basis of these two styles, but what was really important was that Steve and Joe provided this, that's a Long Island twist band rhythm section.
Exactly.
They are not, you know, they were the guys who would go, you can't play blues all evening, guys. People don't want to hear you imitate black folks, you know, just, you know, speed it up.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was part of it.
Tell me something about Zolly. He seemed like such an interesting fellow to watch on stage when in a live concert, and he was kind of a phenomenal musician, but he was also silly at the same time. And
oh yeah,
very entertaining.
No,
It was wonderful to watch.
Eric Clapton famously said, you know, I'm working rather hard, you know, to play these notes, and I sometimes I grimace a bit, you know. He says, this guy, he does the same thing, only he's doing this. Yanofsky was that way. He was like a great tumbler. And he was our own private tumbler, really. Yeah. And he could incite an audience faster than anybody I could really quickly come up with. And was such a vital part of the band that, I mean, people didn't even notice his musicianship. They didn't notice that he didn't play like anybody else. Right. And that always, that's a sad thing for me, because I wish he had his due as a player.
As a player, as a guitarist.
Yeah, but it's like Homer and Jethro. Go figure. The greatest mandolinist of his generation, probably. Yep. And they're doing dumb songs,
stuff,
you know.
Right. Exactly. Kind of a silly question. I've never written a song, but I've been told that those folks that write songs almost consider them to be children. And how do you pick a favorite child? You don't. I mean, you just don't. So I would ask you this question instead. Is there any Spoonful song that you care less to play than others on stage? Or is it just kind of a mix for an audience, and whatever you want to do just comes out?
No, really the only restrictions for me are what is believable as a one guy, one guitar act. There are a few tunes that are rough to pull off. There's a ballad called Full Measure. There's a Summer in the City doesn't always work. You gotta kind of have an audience a little pumped up to get away with that with one guitar. Sounds like next week I'll be playing it in Central Park with a whole cast of characters.
Oh.
Yeah, there's going to be a little show, a free show in Central Park, and that'll be fun.
And who are the characters?
Oh my God, it goes on and on. Maria Muldaur, me, Jesse Colin Young, Jenny Muldaur. It's going to be a bigger list than I've memorized.
Hot Town, Summer in the City is one of the tunes.
But that'll be with a band, so that'll be good.
Exactly. Do you have a favorite song that you've written, one that touches you?
Well, everybody asks that, and really, it isn't about what songs reach you as much as something like, what's the first big hit? So that has a special place for me because that was the lever that permitted all of the other stuff. So, Do You Believe in Magic?
Exactly.
Was a kind of a mission statement too. So that had kind of the Lovin Spoonful ethos kind of all packed inside it.
And I'm sure that our audience is going to be hearing Do You Believe in Magic?
Oh, I never schedule performances or songs or promise them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I got to tell you, we're all looking forward to it. Last question. I know you want to play a little piece for us, which I so greatly appreciate. Back in 2000, you were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It has to be incredibly gratifying for you to reach that pinnacle of success where all these musicians worldwide...
Well, don't sell this too hard because that really wasn't our experience. The Lovin Spoonful were really kind of treated like a second best or something. They put us on stage. They had us set up so the bass pedal, the first time Joe stomped on it, the beater flew off. But we continued because there was cameras running. And at the end we said, well, of course we just want to do that again because the bass, there's no bass drum. Oh, we can fix that in the mix. So really, what was marvelous was being inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame, because that isn't rock and roll sorry ass Rolling Stone critics going, I could have been somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is people that actually have done credible work
And what was the date of that? When were you inducted into the Songwriters Hall?
I don't know.
Sometime.
Yeah.
Sometime, yeah. Kind of funny how the years sort of melt together, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not a thing I memorize.
Right, it happens. It happens.
John Hurt came from Avalon, Mississippi, came to New York City and taught us all how to thumb pick. He used to sing a song, went like this. Avalon's my hometown, always on my mind. Avalon's my hometown, always on my mind. Pretty women in Avalon, they want me there all the time. Now Avalon's just a small town, ain't got no great big range. Avalon's just a small town, ain't got no great big range. Pretty women in Avalon, they sure can spin my change. Avalon's my hometown, always on my mind. Avalon's my hometown, always on my mind. Pretty women in Avalon, they want me there all the time.
All right, folks, just one final reminder that the concert with John Sebastian is being held the evening of Saturday, November 10th, 2018, in the Hudson Portuguese Club in Hudson, Massachusetts. For additional information on the concert and to purchase tickets, please check us out at boltonlions.org. John, thank you for the tune. I love Avalon. I think
good.
you performed that for the WGBH interview that was all over the internet. And one of my favorite little things, so that was great. And thank you for all your time and your hospitality and your wife's hospitality.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it, and we can't wait to see you on the 10th.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pretty women in Avalon, they want me there all the time. Now Avalon's just a small town, ain't got no great big range. Avalon's just a small town, ain't got no great big range. Pretty women in Avalon, they sure can spin my change.